Well, it's very good to be with you. Thanks for coming out early and being with us today. My wife Jessica and my daughter Abigail are here, at least for this morning, and so that's a great joy for me. And I hope you get to say hello to them and welcome them, and they'll welcome you. And so I've found my way to Ecclesiastes, if that's a surprise. So I invite you to find your way there too. If you find the book of Psalms and then start going to the right, you might find it. And our approach to this book is going to be that today will be mostly big picture. So today we'll spend the time looking at looking at why this book is so foreign and unsettling and awkward and uncomfortable, and why that's so wonderful for us that it is that way. And then our next days together we'll go chapter by chapter, and we'll just sit with the open text and we'll walk through together and see what's there. And so I don't have a handout for you. I do apologize for that. If my approach together will be that we'll be a community looking at the text together and seeing what's there and looking to the Lord together. And another approach that I'm taking is my goal isn't to emphasize the scholarly side. I can, if you'd like, the scholarly side of Ecclesiastes. My approach is not to emphasize that aspect, because there are plenty of good resources that do that. But that doesn't mean that questions are off limits about that. You know, was this written in the 10th century BC or not? Is Solomon the one writing this book or not? And why do we think so or not? I'm very happy to engage questions like that. But the dominant theme is to take a look at what Ecclesiastes shows us about God, about each other, about the world, and about Christ, Jesus, and to see how that would begin to disciple us and shape our life and ministry with the Lord. So I'm going to emphasize the pastoral side of the pastor-scholar. But if you have scholarly questions, bring them. But if you are looking for technical Hebrew terms in the context of ancient cultures, I'm not going to emphasize that. I just don't want to disappoint you, but I'm not going to emphasize that. So let's just start with the bewildering statement. I'm going to start away from Ecclesiastes for a moment and just start over here. And let's imagine that you came and to hear someone preach, and they opened the Bible right over here at Covenant Church, and Pastor Peter had a guest come in, and the guest came in there and opened up the Bible and started doing a message about work and laziness. And as an application to the sermon, said this: here's what I want you to do. I would like you this week to get a pencil and some paper, and I would like you to go out and find some ants. A-N-T-S. I'd like you to go out and find some ants. Carve out an hour, 2 hours. Just sit down, watch the ants, and write down what you observe. Go do that, and may God bless you. A lot of us might have a little trouble with that application of the sermon, when actually that preacher is just telling you to do what Proverbs 6 tells you to do. The Proverbs that tells us to go look at the ants, you sluggard. Go look at the ants. They have no leader, and in season and out, they're at work. And learn from them. Well, the reason that kind of sermon sounds New Age to us rather than biblical is because we've had very little contact with the wisdom literature of the Bible. For many of us, for a lot of us, our emphasis is the Apostle Paul, and wonderfully so. Wonderfully so. but or the prophetic tradition of the Bible. So Isaiah and Jeremiah and the minor prophets, and so we're accustomed to thinking about Christianity and life with God in terms of a didactic, prophetic approach. Our preaching reflects that, our teaching reflects that, our assumptions about following Jesus reflect that. But there's this whole other literature of the Bible which is equally from God. And in that literature, the God who created the ants invites you to go take some time, God does not mind taking time, and to watch some ants. And inductively draw conclusions from what you see and learn. Well, that's the wisdom literature. That's why it's unsettling for us and sounds so unfamiliar. But it's invigorating to begin to think that you could, without guilt, for the glory of God, go watch some ants and pay attention to what He created about them and learn about your life for them. So, with that thing, now we come back here to the opening line of this sermon. I call it a sermon, scholars do, because of this word, the preacher, in verse 1. The words of the preacher. That Hebrew word is what you think it would be. It pictures someone standing up in a gathered assembly and proclaiming or teaching. And so, if this is a gathered assembly, proclaiming and teaching, if it is that, then you have this opening line, which is like the big idea of the sermon, the main message, right? And then you have the explanation of that idea throughout the next 11 chapters. And then you have the conclusion to the message in chapter 12. And so let's just start with this. Could you imagine if you're a pastor or if you're in a congregation and you went to hear someone speak, imagine that the preacher stands up there, please turn with me to the book of so-and-so, and then he just cries out, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. Well, you'd probably sort of strap in. You think, wow, what kind of message are we going to have today, And immediately, many of us would be struggling. Why? Because that does not sound like faith. Right? What we're going to see over the next few days is actually, this is a faith statement. This is a statement that comes from the fear of the Lord. It's not the absence of faith. It's rooted in it. But it sounds like it's non-faith. It sounds like it's nihilism. It's despair. There is no point. Right? So it's not right for a Christian to talk like that, is it? That's sort of how we would feel. A person of faith isn't supposed to talk like this. Things are meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Well, we want to just start to quote some Bible verses to such a person to say, feel better. Feel better. You shouldn't think that way. You shouldn't feel that way. So let's just start right there, as in our overview. Let's just start right there with that idea. Vanity of vanity. Everything is vanity. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And let's remind ourselves of this. To say that everything is meaningless is to make a meaningful statement. That's the problem with the nihilist, the one who says we can't know anything. There is no point to it all. The reason we're drawn to that worldview, but then we have to let it go, is because the nihilist contradicts him or herself with those two sentences. We can't know anything. As soon as you make that sentence, we already know something. We know two things at least. We know what the words mean, and we know the meaning you're trying to say. So it's impossible to know nothing. It's impossible. We already know something. That doesn't answer the question if there's a God. But it does tell us we know things. The person that's, the nihilist that says, we can't understand anything. Everything is meaningless. There is no point. As soon as you say there is no point, we get the point. It's self-contradictory. It's like a person who uses technology to say that technology is bad. So they blog about how technology is bad. Or they use a pen to write on paper how technology is bad when pen and paper is technology. Right? So the nihilist rightly understands that science has left us wanting. And optimism is trite. But then the nihilist says, we can't know anything and there is no point, and at that moment there is a point and we do know something. So for a person who's not a nihilist, this person is not despairing like a nihilist. For him to say everything is meaningless is an intentional, strategic, rhetorical move of a pastor, of a preacher, so that you get meaning from what he has to say. Are you tracking with that? Everything is meaningless, by which I want you to know the meaning of meaninglessness. So we remind ourselves of that when our dear neighbors say, there is no truth. They've just stated that a truth exists. The truth that there is no truth. Right? So in that way, one of the clues about life is that we are a knowing people. We know things. We constantly make truth claims. Even the person that says there isn't truth, is making a truth claim about life and assuming to tell us the way life is. So we can't get away from that. There's something that's a clue, the data. How do you guys say that? Data? Tomato, tomato? Data. And so when we look out at the world and we say it's meaningless, this Jewish preacher wants you to derive meaning from what he's saying. What do you make of that?
I guess if I heard a preacher stand up and begin a sermon by saying that, I think to myself, well, everything he's about to say is meaningless. He's making a commentary on what he's about to say. Mm-hmm. That the sermon's going to be without meaning.
Yeah, that's the logical conclusion. That's why it can't, right?
But then he carries on talking.
So that we get the meaning of how meaninglessness, yeah. So this preacher knows what he's doing.
Maybe talk with someone that say that there's no God, we're just kind of here, live, die. And say, well, life is pointless. And my thought is like, well, life is meaningless or pointless. Well, then are you looking for meaning? Are you looking for a point? Because me being a believer, if I believe there's a point, I might be deceived. There might not be a point, but I think there is, because it'll tell me. You saying that life is pointless or body is worth 2.5 cents, whatever. But you imply there's no meaning, that strikes me as odd. You don't know you're deceived. I mean, you're being delusional. I'm not sure if that makes sense. Why are you looking for meaning if you know there's meaning there, but you're still looking for it?
Yeah, well, that's another clue that you're pointing out. We're sad. Such a friend or neighbor is sad that there's no meaning.
Yeah.
And the sadness is a clue. Why why are we sad that there's no meaning? There must be a desire for meaning in us. Why is there a desire for meaning in the human being? Where did it come from? So, yeah, there's a clue there. We're already beginning to imply something that I want to make explicit. This book, I believe, is really important for us in our current cultural climate. Because from the first sentence, it begins to raise the most ancient of questions. And it does not propose to answer them quickly. Right?
Just when I was a teenager, I was struggling with the, a Christian home and everything. Life was pretty good, but meaning-wise, just, what's life really about? It's just Christian duty, because that's a lot of what I heard. Just because joy wasn't really in it. This was the book that I hung out in, which people thought was very weird. I guess it was actually. But if Ecclesiastes hadn't been in the Bible, I don't know what I would have done.
I'm with you.
It's not that I really understood it, but the fact that he says that and then he goes writes a whole book, like Peter said, why are you still talking?
Yes.
If there's no meaning? So it's interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
I think one of the things about when it starts on vanity of vanities, and I guess the guy who's speaking makes a difference. If you understand who the guy is speaking about, then it's got to catch your attention, because
Yes.
we know that the guy that's saying these things
Yes.
beat us all, beat everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So Solomon, of course some scholars will say this is someone speaking, using Solomon's persona to communicate to us. More traditionally, it's just understood as Solomon himself. I think J.I. Packer says either way, if someone's speaking as if they're Solomon, or it's Solomon himself, it's Solomonic. It's Solomon's life and teaching, and if Solomon is the one who, King Solomon fell, he wiser than anyone, but then all the money, the wealth, the women, all those things, and he fell. If this is his personal testimony, which it sure sounds like it when you begin to read it, it's a remarkable thing being said, that a man who had it all is now saying everything is meaningless. It's really like a Johnny Cash song. You ever heard, Johnny Cash? He did a remake of He did a remake of a song called Hurt. It was a 9 Inch Nails song. Have you ever seen this video? I invite you to look it up on YouTube or Google, or, the Google machine, or YouTube. Johnny Cash, the video of the song Hurt. And the words to the song say, you can have it all. Let's see, what is it? You can have it all. My sweetest friend, or something like that. Everything goes away in the end. You can have it all, my pile of dirt. Everything I know or loved or something has been hurt. And as he's doing this, he's an old man, and he's looking right at us. And the images are of all of his museums, his awards, his trophies. The images are playing, and he's looking right at you, and he's picking up a cup of wine or something, and he's pouring it out with his shaky old hand. You can have it all, my house of dirt. And then as the song ends, you see images of Christ being crucified. Because Johnny Cash looked to Jesus. In the midst of all of his ugly brokenness, Johnny Cash turned to Christ. And this song, he's just giving you, it's a haunting. When you realize all that, it's not like a video where he's acting. It's like a first-person testimony to you. You can have all this. It's dirt. It means nothing. So when someone like that, who's had it all, says that actually all of that stuff really messed me up, it wasn't what it promised to be, there's credibility. We pay attention. And so we pay attention to Solomon when he says this. Yeah.
I find it quite encouraging as a preacher that Solomon was willing to be completely misunderstood for the
Yes.
sake of making an extremely powerful overall point.
That's very important.
You know, like, it can be I guess it's very easy to fall into the trap of guarding everything we say, because if I say something wrong, someone might misunderstand me, and then therefore I did not say it that way. I'm going to have to keep showing, make sure I get everything clear.
Right.
Whereas he was willing that everyone who heard him speak would have gone, who is this crackpot?
Right.
Oh, this guy is, he actually thinks everything's meaningless?
Yeah.
Because if we were sitting there, we'd feel like, what is this guy on about? What is his point? But he was willing to take that
Yeah.
because he knew the case he was going to build after that
Yeah.
required him starting like that.
Yes. Yeah, and all these years later, he's still misunderstood. We have to grapple with him. Thanks for saying that. That's a good point. Yep.
That's why Jesus quoted Isaiah and ears to hear and eyes to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have them unless we ask God for them. So.
That was right. So do you guys, C.S. Lewis wrote a book called A Grief Observed, and in the early 1960s, it's his personal diary from when his wife died. And when that book came out, it was very unsettling to people. They were accustomed, to reading his Chronicles of Narnia or Mere Christianity, or his other works like that, The Great Divorce, The Problem of Pain, The Weight of Glory, these remarkable statements of Christian faith. Let me read you some quotes from his diary, A Grief Observed, when his wife died. He writes, "It doesn't really matter." He says, going to God in your grief is like going to a dentist, like a mad dentist. He says, "It doesn't really matter whether you grip the arms of the dentist chair or let your hands lie in your lap. The drill drills on." Then he writes, "Talk to me about the truth of religion, and I'll listen gladly. Talk to me about the duty of religion, and I'll listen submissively. But don't come talking to me about the consolations of religion, or I shall suspect that you don't understand." Meanwhile, this is still C.S. Lewis. "Meanwhile, where is God? Go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain. And what do you find? A door slammed in your face, a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that, silence. You may as well turn away. The longer you wait, the more emphatic the silence will become." That's C.S. Lewis in the grief of the death of Joy, his wife. So you would not expect words like that coming from a man like C.S. Lewis. Ecclesiastes is like that. We don't expect a preacher to talk like this. Now, if you keep reading through his diary, of course, we know the conclusion of it. He sounds like he's just losing his faith, and he's entering the place of most raw questions about everything. And of course, by the time he sorts through all of that grief, he comes back. Actually, I don't think he ever left. I think he just became much more honest about the experience of walking with God at times, just like Ecclesiastes is. And he comes to find the beauty, again, in his walk with God. But when you come to... so he could have been terribly misunderstood. And it's interesting that he says that, actually. If you try to console me with religion, that tells me you don't understand. And what he meant by that, at least, right, is that there is a moment of grief that no words can take away. The grief has to be endured. The dentist will drill on and on. It is that way. And no matter that God is real and there's hope in life, the grief still has to be endured. And if you don't know that, then you don't understand, you know. So Ecclesiastes is this way, meaningless, meaningless. Another place that I just want to go ahead and point out is when, I'll do that in a moment. So, good. So meaninglessness is intentional so that we derive meaning from what he's going to say. And it's unsettling and honest about that. The next thing about Ecclesiastes that's difficult or surprising for us or wild about it is his personal language. It's very personal. The phrase, "I said in my heart," is repeated over and over again. And so, what do we make of personal language? It's almost like, what this reminds us of is this. This isn't a philosophical treatise, even though some people have said it's one of the richest books of philosophy that we have. But it's more like someone's reading you their journal. Bringing you into their deepest thoughts and questions, the ugly ones. Like if you read C.S. Lewis's journal. And for cultures that are very self-absorbed and full of, where taking a selfie has moved beyond just the phone to a way of life, we might like this very much. I get to just say everything that I feel. But we'll learn along the way that's not what's happening here. He's not just saying his favorite color, you know, or what he had for lunch. He's bearing his soul about the most profound questions of life. For others of us who are cultures are more reserved in terms of personal, emotional expression, this is unsettling because he bears it all for us here, invites us in to this intimate language. So it's intimate language. And because of that, here's a point to draw from that. It is so kind of God that the book of philosophy he gives us is set in the context of a personal dialogue. Do you know what I'm saying? Think about what that means for what God's teaching us about how to do philosophy. It's relational, intimate and honest. It's very different from a classroom distant debate. It's sort of like, you know, the humorous scene. We're in college that our parents are paying for, surrounded by pizza boxes that we've just enjoyed, saying, "Life is meaningless," you know, quoting the philosophers to each other about the meaning of life, you know, about how hard life is in our dorm room with air conditioning and a bank account that mom and dad helps us with. It's not that. The academic thing that we all do, the head knowledge that we all have, going into the room and debating and quoting back and forth to try to win the argument. It's not like that, you see. It's this very relational, intimate angst of a conversation with someone who is deeply in search of meaning. So our way of philosophizing is meant to be relational, intimate, honest. Seems that way. Ecclesiastes will force that on us. The other thing about this language is it's humble. So it's intimate and it's humble. This is unique in the history of the world. That's a big statement I just made. First of all, the history of Israel. If we just step away from being Christians for a moment and just look at the Bible as the history of Israel, the uniqueness of Israel is that they do not whitewash their kings. They don't rewrite history. All the other ancient nations do. They rewrite the conquests of their kings to put them in the most positive light. But when you come to the Hebrew history, the scriptures, you're constantly confronted with all the foibles and flaws and terrible blunders of its heroes. It is unique in the history of the world. It's very unusual for a king to let you into his confidence like this. Presidents write memoirs now, and prime ministers. That's a thing to do now. To try to spin or preserve or try to let you in on what they were thinking, to try to preserve their legacy. If Solomon was trying to preserve his legacy, he needed some PR help because, it's humble. The other thing is it's inclusive. That word could make us nervous, but I use it on purpose. It's inclusive. Solomon speaks to us as a human being, not as a Hebrew follower of God. It's not that those are separate, right? He is a follower of God. But unlike other books in the Bible, you do not have to have knowledge of Abraham and the covenants and Moses and the 12 tribes to access the book of Ecclesiastes. Does that make sense? If you read Isaiah or Jeremiah, you're going to hear references to all these places, to Reuben, and to Judah, and to Esau, to Isaac and Jacob, Abraham, and you're going to allusions to all these things. You don't have that in Ecclesiastes. So as he walks through this, it's almost like this humble, intimate language. It's almost like the king takes off his garb, his titles, and sets it aside and just says, I was thinking. I was thinking these things. And I want to share them with you. And the you can be anybody because of that. So this question of meaninglessness, right? Is there meaning? And if there is meaning, what is the meaning of life? That's universal. That's not just a Jewish question. It's a universal human question. And it's a fascinating beauty from God. If God wrote this book the way we believe he did, inspired this book through Solomon's testimony, then God is showing us, giving us access. And as a matter of fact, the wisdom literature is like that. And we'll talk about the wisdom literature then in just a second. But the Proverbs are like that too. The book of Proverbs is meant for a covenant community, to disciple, to teach, to train the young in the community into what wisdom is. But you don't have to have a knowledge of Old Testament history or heroes to access Proverbs. And as a matter of fact, some of the Proverbs are drawn from other cultures because of the truthfulness of them. Job is that way. So there's this inclusiveness about Ecclesiastes, which is good news for us. It's another reason why this book is so important and helpful. Because to read it with an other than Christian neighbor, we don't have to require them to know anything yet about the Old Testament, the promises and prophecies of Jesus, the seed of the woman that will crush the serpents. They don't have to understand anything about that yet. And immediately, in verse 1, they have access to the most central human question. So it's humble, it's intimate language, it's inclusive, and it's raw. It's raw. So soon, one of the things that Solomon will say as we read through here is he will say, I hated life. My mind has just gone blank of where that is. It's chapter 2. Let me see. Verse. So if anybody can find that for me. Oh yeah, here it is, verse 17. So I'll just read this for you. Let's start in verse 12. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Verse 12. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. So this is very encouraging, isn't it? He's going to study wisdom and madness and folly, because God is there and God is not silent, right? Wherever there is, God has something to say, including madness, right? For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet, I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? He's saying, what's the point of being good? The fool and I both die. The fool and I both get cancer. The fool and I both face tragedy and trial. What gain is there in being wise in the world? Well, that's a pretty honest question. And I said in my heart, this is also vanity. For the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance. No one's going to remember us anyway. Seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool! Exclamation point. This is serious to him. The wise and the fool, we die alike, right? So, verse 17, I hated life. How's that for your pastor? If your pastor is telling you, I hated life. I hate it. Oh, pastor needs counseling. Maybe he does, but not if it's the wisdom kind of hatred. I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. For all his vanity and his striving after wind. This is raw language. There's a wisdom kind of hating. Just as there's a wisdom kind of way of saying everything's meaningless, there's a wisdom kind of way of hating life. So again, this isn't the nihilist. This isn't the person who's despairing or depressed. Some of us know what real depression is. We know the body and soul trauma of biological, circumstantial, or spiritual depression. And we know what it is to experientially feel that life is not worth living, and we hate it. That isn't what Solomon is doing here. What Solomon is doing here is saying, I hated life because what is done under the sun is grievous to me. Well, that is a sane response. Right? So as he walks through this book, he's going to show us injustice, poverty, relational misuse, right? He's going to show the beauty, but then the emptiness of art, music, poetry, literature, architecture, creation, nature. He's going to show us that there are seasons of birth and laughing and dancing, but there are seasons of death, of mourning, and of weeping. And when he looks at all these pains and trials and sufferings under the sun. That's his language for the earth, right? Under the sun. He says, it is grievous to me. I hate it. I think we all know what he's saying. When we watched on, when we watched on the news, the Egyptians, Christians, the Coptic Christians marched onto that beach dressed in orange with black hoods, and then were just murdered because they were Christians. What do you feel? I mean, none of us would. Well, the folly of those murderers who, like Saul of Tarsus, still have hope. The folly of those murderers is they rejoice in what they should hate. It is wise to hate murder. It's wise to hate injustice, to hate sex trafficking, to hate when a child is abused, to hate when people use God's name to damage others, to hate when someone planted their crop and then in a moment a storm wiped it out and now they don't know what to do. So to enter the plight, what he calls the unhappy business that God has given us, to enter the plight of human angst, trial, anxiety, and problem, and to say, I hate this, is what he's doing. And so, maybe this is a provocative way to say it, but the wisdom literature teaches us how to hate properly. He isn't hating people. He isn't hating God. He isn't hating himself. But he hates what is done under the sun. What people do to one another. Because the life is grievous. It grieves him. So what we've just said is the language is surprising. It's humble. It's intimate, right? It's inclusive. It's raw. And that kind of language leads us to two conclusions. One, a way of philosophizing, a way of doing philosophy with the biggest questions that's not classroom debate, but relational and personal. And number two, it leads us to a sane response to the grief that's done in the world, which is to wisely hate evil, to wisely hate sin, to wisely hate what it is like to be sinned against, and that people have to suffer that in this world. How are you interacting with that point of the language that's being used? Logan?
I'm interested with this, the wise way of hating. I just wonder whether it's almost like a picture of the way Jesus got angry in the Gospels. In the temple, he sees the sin of the people and what they're doing in the temple.
Yes.
And gets angry. And then again at the tomb of Lazarus, he sees the effects of the curse and sin, and he's so frustrated and angry.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just thinking practically for us and the way we view the world. We're so quick to say anger is wrong, when actually it's that idea of that righteous anger. When we see the way you read on the news about a girl being abused, or whatever it is, and it's actually okay to be angry when you see these things. We don't have to say, oh, wait, I have to view this righteously. Right. It's actually okay to be frustrated when we see these things.
Yes. This is why chapter 1, verse 18. Can anybody want to read that out loud? Ecclesiastes 1, verse 18.
For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow.
Yay!
Let's all go to GTC.
Come be wise.
We should put that across the door.
That's right. That's right. We become sorrowful. When we begin to grow in responding sanely or wisely to what is wrong, means that we're seeing it more. We're letting our hearts be impacted more. And that's why the wise are sad. To grow in wisdom and knowledge is to grow in vexation. Meaningless, the vexation of the world. It's to cry out to God like the Psalms do. It's to grow in sorrow. The wise person isn't depressed. The wise person isn't without hope. They're not despairing. The wisdom includes draws from the fear of the Lord. But they see more of what God sees, and they grieve over more of what God grieves over, and they see more why Jesus died for what he died for, and our frustration not at people or at God, but at the state of things. We feel it, and we're more sorrowful about it. So as we grow in wisdom, we cry more.
There's, I mean, Jesus is kind of amplifying in the Beatitudes, it's kind of drawing all that out
Yes.
and summarizing it. Blessed are those who mourn.
Blessed are those who mourn. That's a wonderful connection right here. Yeah. Why are they blessed? They're mourning out of wisdom for their own sin and being what it is to be sinned against in the world. David, you had a...
I think that David's just, I'm studying here to get some classes, and so basically I can blame my lecturers for my pain.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly right.
You just made this worth it.
I'm so glad. The more knowledge you get, the sadder you'll become.
But it's true, don't you? You meet people who have made a decision not to be emotionally engaged with life.
Yes.
To be emotionally withdrawn. And what preacher's saying is that's the height of folly,
Yes,
to do that.
it is.
Whereas, the world's wisdom would say it's foolishness to go the other way.
Right.
To be emotionally vulnerable with their brutal life.
Yes.
That's where that saying ignorance is bliss is. There's a lot of truth in that.
Right.
But yeah, is it wise? No.
Yeah.
But yeah, to deny things and just cruise along seems wiser.
Yeah, who wants to cry on an ordinary Monday? Because of angst over, some brutality that was on the news. I don't want to. So, I mean, Peter, can you say a little bit more about how did you say that? We choose to be emotionally disengaged.
We choose to withdraw our heart. We harden our heart against other people's pain. Que sera, sera, just be warmed and filled. And in a marriage situation, your spouse is feeling something and you choose not to feel it with him or her.
Yes.
You choose to do something else instead with your emotions.
Yes.
And we congratulate ourselves later of saying, well, I got through that unscathed. And it's the height of foolishness.
Yeah. And as I'm thinking about this, I know this is true in the States. I would need to learn from you about here, but in the States is a very optimistic culture by and large, even though we're among the most depressed people in the world. It's this optimism and happy perspective, and so it's like that in church culture. And so it's difficult to be sad in evangelical church culture. It's not the easiest place to be sad or to to be vexed out of wisdom, because others of us want to be quick to fix it, rather than recognizing, oh, it's wise to be sad about sad things. It's okay, you know.
Yeah. I just want to make, and we were talking about in chapter 2, verses 12 through 17. I'm kind of from a programming background, so I want to have some little hooks.
Yeah.
So I want to, not to just to make it that small, but just kind of give me something to go back to, because I love this book. It's really depressing in one sense, but it's depressing for the right reasons.
Yeah.
It says in verse 16, it says, there was no laughter minutes with the wise man as with the fool,
Yeah.
as much as coming days all will be forgotten.
Mhm.
And how the wise man and fool alike died. In the very following verse it says, so I hated life.
Mhm.
And so I'm connecting those two verses together. It's just
Yeah.
like, you got a guy that's living wisely,
Yeah.
just doing everything right, a guy you look at and respect.
That's right.
God has blessed him greatly, and you have a complete idiot,
Yes.
but they both die.
Yes.
Because of that, I hate life.
Yes.
Okay, I can explain that. To me is just like, it helps me put this in context a little bit. Give me
Yes.
some hooks that, okay, how am I going to kind of start looking at the rest of the book a little bit? That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, there's no bargaining with God. There's no formula. And so that'll take us to our next little bit. Let's go there. Let's take a look at the wisdom literature itself. The idea that because I follow God, things will go good for me. If I don't follow God, things will go bad for me. No, the same things can happen to the fool and the wise. All the things that are done under the sun like this are grievous to me. So let's remind ourselves of the wisdom literature for a second. Job. Psalms, Song of Solomon, the book of James in the New Testament. You can think of the book of Proverbs as the norms. This is one way to think of it. And the book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes as the exceptions. So, when you learn a language, like English, you start to gradually, get a handle on the grammar and things like this, or Spanish or Greek or whatever you're going to learn, right? And inevitably, if you're in your first Greek class or Spanish class or whatever, you learn some basic paradigms. And you do that for a day or two or a week or something, and you're starting to feel good about yourself. You got these paradigms. And then the teacher says to you, now we need to look at the exceptions. Right? I before E, except after C. Cool, I got that. Except for words in neighbor and way. What is it? Neighbor and way, and sound like A and neighbor and way. Well, wait a minute. And sometimes why? What? Or whatever. So you start to get the norms, and then you start to have to deal with the complexity of exceptions to the norms. And we get impatient with that, trying to learn a language, because it's hard. That means you have to account for anomalies rather than just having the rule. Life is like that. So when you come to the book of Proverbs, basically it says, see that person having bad things happen to them? They're obviously a fool. See the person having good things happen to them? That's because they're wise. Good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. And there's tremendous truth to that, right? It's foolish for me to, it's probably foolish for me on Friday, Saturday morning at 3 a.m. to walk down a dark alley by myself on K Road with my computer, just in my hand, or my phone, just in my hand, looking like an American, It's unwise to do that. And if I choose to do that and I get beaten up and robbed, is it because the world's against me? No. Is there some spiritual thing God's trying to teach me? Yeah, don't walk out at 3 a.m. There's wisdom in folly, and when as we are young and then we age, we learn this in fits and starts. When our parents, when we were 6 and we were standing on top of a ladder of a slide, and it's like 6 feet or something, or 10 feet or whatever it is, and our parents say, "Don't jump. You'll hurt yourself." But we think, we can jump, and then we break our leg. Was that the devil? No. That was us not listening to our parents. That was folly, right? It was just folly. And so this is the benefit of Proverbs, in Proverbs 7, he takes his son and he looks out the window and he shows his child 2 foolish people. A woman whose husband is away, dressed and ready for love making, and a man who shouldn't be anywhere near her at that time. And then he lets you hear what they sound like when they talk to each other. "Come, my husband is away. Let us have our fill of love through the night." And he's saying this is folly. She shouldn't be at that spot while her husband's away. This guy shouldn't be there. He should be home, right? And so Proverbs is really helpful. The wise norms. Don't go to K Road 3 in the morning holding your computer and your passport out for anybody to see. As a young woman, don't go by yourself. Be in pairs, be in 2s and 3s, So it's just wisdom, norms for life. The problem is Job's friends. And my pen. Job's friends. Do you guys remember the story of Job and his friends? So we've talked about meaninglessness is meaningful. We've talked about the language, the kind of philosophizing and wise hatred that this intimate, humble language brings. And now we're looking at this reality that the wisdom literature takes us into the exceptions, shows us there's no immunity or bargaining with God. So Job's friends, right? If Job's friends are dealing with Job from the book of Proverbs, makes all the sense in the world why they treated Job the way they did. You remember? Job loses everything. He's covered in boils and all that stuff, and death and profound loss and economic sabotage and tragedy, weather tragedy, and he's just undone. Tears his clothes. His friends come, they sit in the ashes with him, and while they do that, everything is good. But then they start to speak, and everything goes bad. This is why Job is such a hard book to read. Because Job's friends say true things. It's always hard to know what part of Job you can quote. Because they say true things about God and about life. They say the norms really well. So what it is the story allows us to see what the friends don't and what Job doesn't, right? We see a conversation with God and Satan, right? So we're allowed in, privy to this information, to this scene, that God is actually involved. And that God is for Job and will advocate for Job. But Job doesn't know this. And his friends don't know it, right? So they operate on the assumption that God is against Job. Why? Because bad things have happened to Job. it must be that Job has sinned. Right? The disciples are like this in the New Testament. For a while, right? If someone's sick, the assumption of the community and the disciples is, who sinned? Remember the blind man? Who sinned, you or your parents? When the tower of Siloam fell, it's like Mark 13 or something, or the tower fell accidentally and killed many people. They wanted to know, who is at fault, who sinned? The assumption is if you had been good, that would not have happened to you. My grandparents on my dad's side live near Nashville, Tennessee, in the United States, and they loved the Lord. There were floods that came through Nashville a handful of years ago. People had no water, no electricity. They needed outside help for food, things like this. And there were several Christian groups who went to Nashville not to help, not to provide water, but to hold signs and to say, obviously, this is God's judgment upon you. People made statements like that when the Twin Towers fell. But Christians were in those towers too. That this is the judgment of God upon America because it is starting to favor same-sex relationships. Because it's starting to whatever, all the stuff that Facebook people say. The disciples thought like that. Job's friends thought like that. And it comes from reading a book like Proverbs as if Job and Ecclesiastes do not exist. So in God's providence and wisdom, Ecclesiastes and Job are the bookends to Proverbs. It's like if this tells you, love God and good will happen to you, because there's a truth in that. You make different choices. You put yourself in different environments. You value different things. You let go of things that you would have held on to that have ultimately would have hurt you. There's a truth in that. But then you read Job and you see a good man with terrible things happening to him. A faithful man. And everything bad happens to him. And you go to an Ecclesiastes and that's exactly what he will say again and again. What good is it to be wise? Because the same calamities happen to the wise and the fool. And he'll pose this question. He'll say, I've seen, we'll read it this week. He'll say, I've seen a foolish man rise in power and wealth and authority, and I've seen a wise man forgotten. And so, parenting is like this. Church life is like this. Walking with God is like this. We learn the norms, but then we have to account for the complexity of exceptions. And if we don't, we profoundly misjudge people, and we profoundly damage them in the name of God. So, what do you make of that? Yeah, Logan.
It really protects against a legalistic application of Proverbs. I mean, I remember growing up and being a young teenager, having a group of friends. We were talking about another family whose children had walked away from the Lord.
Yeah.
And the assumption of us all was, obviously, the parents didn't bring the children up in the way they should go.
Right.
Because then they never would have left.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's so easy to apply it like that. You
Yes,
read it
it
in
is.
Proverbs, there it is, cool. Legalistically apply it.
Yes.
I think it's just safeguards that happen.
Yes. Yeah. The way I'll say this can sound unsettling. Proverbs aren't promises. They're norms. It's
Get that descriptive, not prescriptive.
yeah, descriptive rather than prescriptive. It is generally true that if you raise someone, if we're raised in the knowledge of the Lord, when we are old, we will not turn from it. That's generally true in comparison to saying, I don't have to, I can raise you in any way I want to and you'll turn out fine. I mean, that's not a promise, though. Yep.
I'm not sure anybody else, but to me, Proverbs make the most sense. They're the easiest to read.
Yeah.
You really don't have to interpret. Oh yeah, wise person does this, fool does this, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I do find, I really like Ecclesiastes a lot, and but I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it's saying.
Yes.
And also with Job, I know this, because of what other people have told me, I'm kind of getting a feel of the story.
Yes.
But I'm afraid a lot of like, and maybe because it's the way it's written, I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't quite get it yet. I believe what they're telling me, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yes.
And so, so I realized that I got a lot to learn.
Me too.
But that's been my experience.
Yeah. So, a Proverbs, maybe to speak crassly, a Proverbs kind of Christianity is what many of us have known. Take 2 Bible verses and call me in the morning.
I think because our culture too was based on Judeo-Christian law and stuff, and laws pretty much are actually acted on and applied. So
Yes.
so when people look at other cultures that don't have that, say you go to, I've lived in Africa for 10 years and you get there and you realise why it is that poor people don't stick their head up, because corruption and there's just, it's all about relationships and what you do affects this. You don't worry about the law so much.
Yes.
It's who's applying the law.
Yes.
And what's he like? What's his character like? You've got to get to know that before you do anything.
Yes.
And then if you know what his character's like, you play to that. And
Yes.
so we look at that and say, oh, that's terrible. How could you, pay someone who asks for a bribe?
Yes.
But when you actually live in that culture, it's I think the person asking for the bribe is sin, but paying that is not necessarily sinful.
Yes.
Whereas we would automatically think you should never ever
Right.
pay extortion.
Mhm.
But it's not quite that simple.
It's not that simple. Right. Yeah, there's a friend who's a pastor in Las Vegas, Nevada, where, Las Vegas, prostitution, gambling, all those things. And they have a ministry to prostitutes. And what he's talked about that other Americans in other contexts do not seem to understand is that a woman who's a prostitute who does want to come to know Christ, and maybe does. So he's telling me about one woman who has come to know the Lord and become a Christian, and she's still prostituting herself. Why? Because she can't just leave. She'll be physically beaten or killed. So it's this whole... So he's meeting with her for Bible study, personal Bible study, knowing the night before she's been doing tricks. She knows it too, and she can't stand it. She hates it. She's grown to hate it. But it isn't that simple just to now get her out. They have to be savvy to have a plan to get her safely away. Someone like me somewhere else can just say, repent, turn, or something like this. She is. But this is life under the sun. It is not that simple. Yeah. So there's what does this start to tell you about God? If these words are If we believe Ecclesiastes is inspired and inerrant just as much as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, what does this start and reveal to you about God? Meaninglessness is meaningful. There's a wise way of hating life. Intimate language way of philosophizing. Humble. Exceptions, complexities to the norms. What does this tell you about him?
He's not black and white. Cut and dry.
It's not cut and dry. That's remarkable, isn't it? We should pause right there and take about 3 months to think about that. Because for most of it, well, not most, but for many of us who do seek to follow God, we think of it more like that.
Yeah, well, it's part of that. He's patient because
Patient.
if he wasn't patient, he would zap people as soon as they did something bad.
Right.
Which is what I would do.
Yeah, right.
Well, you know,
Right.
we want
Right.
we want justice, and
Yeah.
we want it right now.
Yeah.
Which is why good people, when they get into positions of things, can really cause damage
Yeah.
because you try and be God and you don't know all the information. Like,
Yeah.
you really don't. There's a movie about that, a famous one. I don't remember what it's called, but where a guy who wants to do good and overthrows corruption is in the States, and he gets there, but any means to the end. And just he becomes worse than the people he kicked out.
Huh.
Yeah, and that's quite powerful. It's like, yeah, that's in all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, life is messy,
Yes.
and it seems like God's the only one that can handle that.
Yes. Life is messy and God has a capacity for that. Yeah.
His ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts.
Right. His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. Yeah. Yeah. Two other thoughts just before we have tea. Along this line of entering a complexity of something, being vexed by it, sorrowing about it, in a very relational and personal way, slows us down. Right? It would have slowed Job's friends down. Do you remember by the end of the book of Job, God rebukes Job's friends, but he defends Job. Do you remember that? It's really stunning. I mean, Job says very raw things to God. His full-hearted not understanding and his questions to God. And at the end of the book of Job, God says, in all of this, Job did not sin. So there's a level of C.S. Lewis type journaling that God is able to enter with that we might think is sort of sinful or an absence of faith that actually isn't at all. God must be safe enough for Job to throw his whole heart at God like that. You know? Job must trust God enough in a surprising way, right? It's like parents and kids. Tell me if I'm sort of getting close to the matter on this. Like, if you have an abusive parent, or you have a parent who's not necessarily abusive, but they're manipulative, or a parent that's not able to handle negative emotions, then as a child, you don't entrust your full heart to them because you know they can't handle it. Or they'll talk to you, but then you offer what's a negative emotion, and then they let you have it. Hey, just tell me what's going on. Well, I hate life. What? You can't hate life. Well, we learn not to risk that, you know. Or a parent that never says they're sorry about that kind of thing. We just learn to keep our distance. And if we do, the first time we do try to step back, it often comes out wrong because we have to gear up. We have to get real courage, and it's got to almost be like a fight. We're going to You know, we got to say, we have to talk back, you know. Whereas a parent who has a capacity for a negative emotion, who's able to give some kind of room and time, who can, at least in their best moments, say they were sorry. As a child, you and I know, we can actually think about risking saying what's on our heart, you know. We may not do it because it's still dad and mom, you know. But we somehow know we could if we needed to, you know. We might even be harder on the parent we trust the most because we know they can handle it.
You see hard, you kind of be like more honest, if you will.
More honest, even more push back.
More honest about their failings, yeah.
There's some kind of, I don't know how to say this really. If I say to you, I hate you, and I go up to my room and slam my door, then I come down and have dinner, you know. Somehow I know you can handle me saying, I hate you. Like, somehow I know that moment doesn't define our whole relationship. That there's been everything that's gone before it, and there's some sense of what's going to come after. Whereas if I think that you always need me to smile for you, and that every day I have to prove to you that you're the best, gradually, if I say I hate you, I'm not going to my room, slamming the door, and coming to dinner. If I say I hate you, it took me a while to get up the courage, and I'm gone. Because the issue is the lack of safety. What I'm trying to get at is there's something going on with Job and the psalmists, that they are able to pour out, and Solomon here in Ecclesiastes, they're able to say, take their hardest statements to God because they believe God can handle it. Even Jonah, and wanting to die and being angry, you know, like he's angry because he knew God would be merciful. Isn't that something? I knew you'd be merciful to these people. That's why I didn't want to tell them about you. Even to be able to say that to God, you know, to be able to take that stuff in prayer. I just want to die. Just let me die, is in the context of a prayer. There's just a level of putting that on someone because we think he can handle it. Do you get?
It's like love, hate is the two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Because the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy.
Right.
So if you hate, you're still engaged with that.
Right.
And there's an energy that can be turned.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I think we'll talk with my wife about it sometimes. We love each other, but it's like there's actually things I hate about you.
Right.
Like because I want you to be more than that.
Right.
You know.
Right.
It bugs me that you have these things. Not maybe because they hurt me. I want more for you.
Yeah.
And I want her to say that to me too. Like,
Yeah.
it's being real. Like.
Or I just pick my toenails at night and I shouldn't, and that. Who enjoys that, right, Jessica? I mean.
Repentance is the door. I was thinking that in the marriage relationship, like what you're describing about parents and kids, but also our spouses like see the realist versions of ourselves, or like you see the worst of me, and I can be that in a way that I wouldn't probably with someone else because I want to preserve, but you can handle it, you know, or whatever. I'm gonna just let you have it because I know you will, and we'll get through. And I think, or those close relationships where you can do that, it's actually more safe and real, but it's uglier too.
Yeah. And other kinds of relationships that are less safe are more pretty and preserved because we don't.
I'm afraid if they see that,
Right. We'll be rejected or hurt or something.
It's interesting how we tend to teach the opposite of this. I remember growing up, like someone's struggling with something, someone's sorrowing, and we tell them, don't question God.
Right.
You talk to God about it, but you can't ask God, why is he doing this? God's sovereign, God's powerful, of course he's got a good reason. How dare you question him?
Yeah.
I remember being told that. I remember telling people that, you know. Yet, all through the Bible, we seem to get the picture that it's okay to come to God with the full brunt of our issues and say, what is going on?
Yeah.
You're meant to be this, yet it seems like I'm getting that. How is this right?
Yes. And if someone were looking in on you doing that, it would look like a relationship.
True.
I had a living situation back in the U.S. I had 3 flatmates, and two of us we'd go at it, one thing, and just, I'm not saying I'm the easiest guy to live with at all, but this guy, there's some struggles with him and everything, and so 2 of my other flatmates were really adverse to any confrontation. So we'd kind of go at it a little bit, not yelling, but just like, hey, wait a minute, they would just like this, and then they would just bolt to their room.
Yeah.
And well, one of the guys, they were all 3 of those guys would be friends of mine, and one of the guys got to know better as we lived together. And I can tell you, because there's something going on that he's not telling me.
Yeah.
And so I could tell it was bothered, but I just wouldn't tell him. It's like, I don't know what to do if you don't tell me.
Yeah.
So I was like, bro, what's up? And what's going on? And finally he just goes, and literally turns and runs and closes the door.
Wow.
I was like, and I was just shocked that I thought about it, because the only way he could possibly tell me you have to get so upset,
Right.
just you can't hold it any longer.
Yeah.
And I did provoke him a little bit, to be honest. But the funny thing is, after that situation, I went back to him and I said, I was like, hey, that was a little bit much, but thanks for telling me.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your honesty and letting me know, because I can't read you.
Yeah.
But after that, our relationship did get better.
Yeah.
And the point was, the reason I wanted to go, there's something there that you're not telling me, please have the gut to tell me.
Yeah.
And so it's the issue of being honest. Lord, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
I want to do this. And he goes, I'm not saying I'm right, but I'd be able to face myself.
Yeah.
A lot of people I don't think can be honest. Because they can't. They're kind of part of it. They can't be honest with themselves.
Yeah.
The sin that's in their life, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that issue of, if you look at yourself, and when I think guys that I disciple, they look at themselves and say they admit to themselves they've done it. It's much easier to admit to somebody else and even admit to God.
Yeah.
Because this isn't a standard thing with God. The standard is Jesus.
Yeah.
I don't. It's
Yeah.
just.
Yeah. That's right. Let me show you the exception to Proverbs. That's meant to be a joke. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 26, verses 4 and 5. So we've said that Proverbs is simple, and the norms, Ecclesiastes and Job, give us the complexity. Now let's go look back to Proverbs and remind ourselves that Proverbs isn't always simple, and the norms. Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5. This is the heart of wisdom right here. Would you mind reading that, Jay?
Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes.
Which one is it? And that's the point. Wisdom isn't a formula. You have norms and you have complexities. It's an art, not a science. And so you look at a given situation, and there are times a fool would be jabbering at you and you just let it go. There are other times a fool would be jabbering at you and you need to respond. And how do you know when and when you don't? It doesn't answer it. It's unanswered. And what that means is we have to actually take a step to discern what would wisdom do. That really matters because some of us who believe in God's sovereignty, that is, we believe that God governs and ordains all things, we can slowly begin to think that we have no responsibility. Oh, that was all just God, or it was all just the devil. The wisdom literature strongly pushes back on that. Yes, from the vantage point of the fear of the Lord, God who governs all reality, We have to decide. Will we respond to this fool, or will we let this fool go? Wisdom would know what to do. And we're meant to learn it, to be trained up in it, in our wisdom. Final thought, as we have tea here, is meaninglessness is meaningful. The language is humble, intimate, inclusive, and raw, which leads us to a wise hating of life, which reminds us there's no bargaining with God. It's just not simple norms with God. There's a whole complexity under the sun that God is providing for us so that we learn to respond to people like Job wisely. Final thought here is that Ecclesiastes is inductive. It's an inductive book. Do you know what I mean by that? It doesn't tell you what it's about. It doesn't answer the question first. So deductive means I answer a question for you, and then I tell you how I got to that answer. God is faithful. Here are 3 reasons how I come to that conclusion. That's deductive. Inductive is God faithful? How would we even know? And then we discover it together. Inductive is the way most of life goes. Deductive is the way we wish it went. We wish that God just told us every day and we just knew every day what to do and then could just follow the steps like a recipe. But inductive is the way we learn almost anything. Language. I mean, think about that. We're born into the world with we don't know anything. We just watch and listen. And people keep doing this to us and so we start to do it back to them, you know. And then we say words, and they say words. We start to try to say words, you know, like it's this whole inductive process where we gradually learn about life and what's in the world. This book is like that. Most of the stories in the Bible are like this. You have to read to the end of the story to know what happened. History is like this. Our stories are not yet finished, so we don't know what tomorrow will bring. We have to enter the day. So, this book is inductive. What that means is, he says everything's meaningless, and then you have to wade through 11 chapters of Proverbs, riddles, unanswered questions, griefs, pain, in order to get to chapter 12. And then he tells you what the conclusion is to all this. Why would God give us a book like that? And what does that teach us about discipleship or following Him?
It's a journey.
It's a journey.
It's messy.
It's messy.
He's not going to give it to us all up front. He wants us to learn it through life.
Yeah.
Experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that terrible?
Yeah. It's invigorating and awful.
I think as the discipler or the teacher or the preacher, it means we don't actually necessarily have to give people all the answers.
Right.
We can lead them, we can give them truths,
Yes.
but then say you have to work that out in your own life.
Yes.
Kind of like Larry Crabb talks about in relationships, the mystery versus management.
Yeah.
We cannot manage our own life. Like, you just can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
You can wear yourself out.
Yeah.
Or it'll work for a while, but there's going to be a time when God will make sure it's not working anymore.
Yeah.
Because there's the mystery part, which we need faith for, I guess.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't need faith.
Yeah. So the Lord Jesus is with His disciples and He says to them, I have more things to tell you, but you can't handle it right now. It's like the person they're about ready to die. The secret to life is. You know, what was the secret to life? You know. So we're like this with students. We're like this with our kids. They're there's a whole world of things we're not saying to our kids, depending upon their age, right? That's our problem as parents, is we say too much because we're afraid or we get out of control, and but to wait for the time. And there's this wise teachers who wait for the time to reveal stuff to us. So Ecclesiastes is a discipleship, it's a mentoring, it's an apprenticeship in how to be very uncomfortable and sit in that discomfort of unanswered questions, riddles, poems, ache, believing that there's a purpose and waiting for it. And so we'll see that together as we go through the book. Well, let's take a break.